The Agriculture Department has acknowledged that growing energy crops is now an important new area for farmers to consider, and this message was well received by an Andreas farmer who has ambitious plans to develop an anaerobic digester plant which could supply 25% of the island's energy needs if supported.
Brian Brummer used to farm at Ballaclingham Farm. I've been involved with the Manx Farmers Union over the years. I spent 6 years as president, and together with my wife, we run Silly campsite.
Yeah, I'm Robert Murray. Again, I farm at Ballacory, Andreas. In a previous incarnation, I was vice president of the Manx National Farmers Union for a number of years. Same time as you were there, Phil, at opposites, almost on opposite sides. But and then obviously since then, my own farming has altered dramatically from then. Probably a little bit with the demise of Laxaglen Mills, etc. And we're looking at doing this energy project.
And we will get on to that shortly, but I just thought having the three of us together might be a good way to begin the programme, because part of what you're hoping to do is find a new outlet for farmers. If we go back to when I first got involved in the Department of Agriculture. But at that stage, we were very much dependent on production support for agriculture. Then the red meat derogation was lost, and as a result, we had, well, you tell me, several meetings which felt like it went on for years.
Yeah, we did. And you've also got to remember at the time, European policy had changed. And with European policy, we were associate members of the EU, so we had to sort of follow EU guidance, so to speak, or EU law. I would suggest now we don't. But that's where we were at, and it was a massive change to go from production support to sort of the countryside care scheme and paying for environmental stuff. I'm a firm believer, to be honest with you, that farmers even now should be paid a fair price for what they produce. They shouldn't need subsidy. There's enough money in the food chain for a farmer to have his fair share, and unfortunately that is not happening. And you hear prices now on stuff, and they haven't gone up in 10, 15 years in the real world. Grain, you talk about, obviously I was a cereal farmer, and we were knocking around the £150 a tonne for grain 15 years ago. And, really, we should be looking at £300 or £400 a tonne now, and we're nowhere near that. And, it's frightening. I just really, really feel for the next generation of farmers that they're keen, they're really good at what they do, but they're really struggling, and we've got this global economy, and people just do not want to pay for food. And we, as an industry, can't carry on like that.
And of course, the thinking, Brian, was that once production support went, if people wanted farmers to produce food, they would have to pay a viable amount to the farmers to encourage the farmers to do that. So rather than government encouraging farmers, it was going to be done through the marketplace, effectively.
Yeah, and in a bigger, more connected environment, that works. But the problem with the Isle of Man, you could argue that in comparison to the UK, the farms are too small, which leads to inefficiencies. And then when you produced your product, 70% of what's produced by Manx farmers is exported, so it incurs a steam packet cost to export it. And 95% of the food eaten on the island is imported by the big supermarkets. So there's only a very small area where the Manx farmers can work and sell on the island, because to sell to one of the supermarkets, you've got to basically export to re-import through their systems.
One of the things that we all hoped would happen would be a significant amount of diversification in terms of new products being brought to the food market, as well as diversification in existing areas. So I suppose in dairy there would be an expansion of the products available, and likewise in the meat sector, and presumably cereals as well. Do you think that's happened? I don't know. What do you think?
I think half the problem was there was a period a few years ago where the big buzzword was niche markets, and in my humble opinion, government probably threw their weight behind almost the small niche markets, butcher, baker, candlestick maker. And that's fine for smaller businesses. But for mainstream agriculture that relies on turnover, you're producing a commodity, it was just a non-starter. It couldn't work. And I think then we've had the foibles of problems with the processors, certainly with the meat plant, and obviously the demise of the mill on the back of Ramsey Bakery closing. And it's just become a desert, if that makes sense. It's not good. And as Brian's already alluded to, even, we're totally reliant on that boat. And the margins aren't there. It's as simple as. And
of course, what we knew as policymakers trying to work out what the solution for Manx agriculture should be was that we were too big to be niche and too small to be sort of main sort of market suppliers. Is there any sign of that changing, do you think?
No, I don't see a lot of it. No, I think the other thing is agriculture in the UK have other options. They do other things, and hence, whatever it is, they've got more options probably with tourism. They certainly have with energy. And we just seem to be so constricted as an industry at the moment. And I just think it's an absolute travesty. It's a tragedy, not a travesty. It's a tragedy that we've got a nation like ourselves that we can feed ourselves, but we're just, second-class citizens.
And Brian, you did what many farmers have done and certainly were encouraged to do, which was diversification. But the value of diversifying into areas that were non-food related it seems to be greater than diversifying within the food sector.
Yes, I think you're right there. We, as you know, we diversified and formed Sillymoose Campsite, which was started off as a diversification on the side of the farm and became more than a substantial part of the profits at the end of the day as it expanded. And to put it crudely, if you like, we were farming tourists instead of farming land. And people on holiday, etc., are more liberal with their cash than people buying food and trying to save to go on holiday. So, yes, it did work. It was a different market, and it did work for us. But having said that, every farm on the island can't do the same, but there are other options out there, obviously.
What had you expected to happen when you were vice president of the Farmers Union and we were having all these discussions? Did you believe that we could have found some bright new solutions, or were you always, I suspect you were always a little sceptical?
I was very sceptical as long as we were tied to basically, and more so now, UK retailers. I think we're just a number on a piece of paper and they're brutal. And I think you're probably also seeing now, don't get me wrong, not everything that ShopRite did was perfect, but at least it was local. Where I think where we are now is pretty scary. It's not good.
I'm sure I've told you, the listener, this anecdote before, but I was at a food security conference in London, and a prominent accountant for one of the major supermarkets basically stood up and said, we know there's the kind of 2/3 to agriculture. There's 1/3 that is only in the business because they've inherited their farms and it's something they like doing. They're not making any money out of it. In fact, they're probably losing money. There's a middle third, which is kind of just about managing to break even and pay a basic salary to the farmers, and then there's the top third that that basically make a profit out of agriculture, a reasonable profit. And he said we set our prices based on that, the profitability of that top third, and if we get rises in fertilizer prices, we increase the price that we're prepared to pay for the product, because we know that we need that top third to be profitable. But if fertilizer prices drop, then our price drops with it. And that's what you're up against, Robert.
Oh, you totally. It's, you see your costs going up and down, but it doesn't. If fertilizer prices go up and your product goes up a bit, there's no more margin for you. The margins are still the same, if not less, and because they never do. We see our costs rising, and we never get like for like, end of, and we just sort of, I don't know, we're going around in ever decreasing circles a little bit. And like you asked me, what did I think when when I was vice president of the union? Yeah, well, hey, I was 20 years younger, Phil, and a lot more go. But as you get older, you get a lot more apathy sits in. But as I come down to it, I said to you before, my concern is very much the next generation. They're the people that they need a future, and they need a future to enjoy what they do, not just do it. Because that's agriculture. You're not in it totally for the money. You're in it because you enjoy doing it, and a lot of people out there are doing it. There's a lot of people out there now not enjoying it, and that's worrying.
What you were saying there, Phil, and I'm sure the supermarkets would deny it, but basically they were controlling the market and controlling the prices. But they have tripped up now in that they've pushed the dairy sector to a lot, not the Isle of Man, but the UK, until a lot of farmers have gone out of dairying, and they've pushed the beef sector, so a lot of people have gone out of the suckler cow industry, and now all of a sudden the red meat price is making its own market. The supermarkets have lost control of that one, and that sector has come back to reality or profitability of what's required to keep the sector going forwards. So they have overplayed the hand, really, in a way there, and as good as it is for farmers now that the beef price, the red meat price is rising, the supermarkets have lost control of that one.
And of course, overplaying their hand when it comes to a food market matters an awful lot more than if they were producing, I don't know, wheels for cars or engines or whatever. I mean, the worst comes to the worst. You can do without wheels for a little while and do without engines, but if you haven't got any food, that's a big concern.
Yeah, and Manx farmers are capable of feeding the island, but it would be a different diet, and it would be a traditional meat and 2 veg sort of diet. The modern consumer likes a lot more variety in pastas and rices and etc. And so you have this global market. But yeah, if they control prices and force people out of business, sooner or later you end up with a shortage, and then you're in trouble. Yeah. And
in your former, or possibly still, I think you're still involved with the farm, aren't you? But as a big grain baron from the north, you if you can't supply milling wheat, because obviously with the loss of Ramsey Bakery, the need for milling wheat is substantially diminished. You're left with the alternative. If you are going to grow it, you have to ship it, which just adds a whole load of extra cost.
Well, I would suggest if you took, you're breaking even at best, I would suggest when you start shipping it. Your best market is always your local market, end of. And, I always remember, people used to moan at, the late Jimmy Duncan used to moan about the cost of his bread and all the rest of it. I've noticed now, and they used to quote this 10p loaf and all the rest of it. Now the Ramsey Bakery, the demise of that's gone. Where's the cheap bread? It doesn't exist. And I just think it's such a shame what happened there. And yeah, we're going, we're sort of looking back maybe with slight rose-tinted spectacles, but we had a situation where we had all the staples on the island we could produce. So if things went wrong, we survived. As Brian has already said, it's not maybe the diet that everybody particularly wants, but we would survive. And I think the same now is true a little bit with energy, to be honest with you. I think it's so sorry if I keep harping on about it, but we as a nation need to be able to look after ourselves and not rely on other people. And I think you're seeing in America now, they're looking after themselves. And if we're not careful, we're going to be left high and dry.
And for listeners wondering, that wasn't my stomach rumbling because I'm ready for my dinner. Who's that?
Oh, that's my black Labrador lying underneath the table, Alfred.
So you mentioned there about Donald Trump, and I mean there are potentially big and significant impacts on global trade as a result of this. Is there possibly some sort of silver lining in that cloud for food production?
There is a little bit. The trouble is, with food production, it's a bit of a political weapon. Like Trump's bringing in his tariffs, so we can all see what's going to happen when the UK government cave in and they need to sell the Bentleys and the Rolls Royces. You can see who's going to be the sacrificial cow, and that'll be agriculture. And you'll see potentially hormone beef coming into the UK from America, and they talk about chlorinated chicken, all those sorts of things. And that's the problem, isn't it? UK politicians, most of them are urban-based, and they don't, frankly, their attitude is, as long as it's on the supermarket shelves, they don't really care where it comes from. And
of course, what the political classes will say is that it provided the products that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily want to see on our supermarket shelves, provided those are properly labelled. So you have labels about chlorinated chicken, and you have labels about hormones in beef. Then it's down to the consumer to make those decisions.
Yeah, yes, it is, but the same could be argued that over the last 10 years we could have had that policy already. But what we've had is a blanket ban of no hormones being used. And so despite what you would pick up on some social media, etc., the welfare standards and the health standards worked to by UK, Isle of Man, European agriculture far exceed anything else in the world. And as good as that is, it comes with extra costs. So then if somebody starts importing a product with reared or grown to a lower standard, GM products, that sort of thing, it's a cheaper product. So, yeah, give us all the opportunity then, not just the imported things, if you want to do it that way. But why have we worked to these higher standards for the last 10, 20 years then?
And then, of course, you risk a race to the bottom in terms of the sort of food that's supplied. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that you're painting a far from rosy picture about where we are in terms of food production. But the reason I've come all the way down to Andreas to talk to you fellas is you are hopeful that a new energy sector can be developed for Manx farmers.
Yeah, very much so, Phil. I think you've got to look now with the policies that have come out of Tynwald at the end of last year. They're talking in their general agricultural policy, they're talking about being able to produce energy as opposed to just food. And I think it's down to the same argument exactly as we're talking about with with food. If we are able to survive ourselves on our own, we will prosper. If we are at the end potentially of an extension cable to your neighbour, and then the neighbour's running out of power, who's going to be cut off? We are. And we're in a serious situation. We've got a government that wants to try and grow the economy. Well, to me, the most important thing in growing the economy, you've got to have a bountiful, plentiful supply of energy. And the fact what we're also talking about energy-wise is also green, that's another bonus.
So for those who don't know, and we have, I think, spoken before on Manx Radio about your proposal. What exactly is it that you're hoping to develop?
What we're trying to develop is an energy hub, a renewable energy hub. Now, that energy hub will be made up of several technologies to give a blended price for power. Like obviously you've got the intermittents, like probably solar energy. But the problem is, and it's the same with wind power, they're intermittent power. You don't have 24/7 coverage. So what we're looking at doing is complementing or supplementing that renewable energy with anaerobic digestion, which is basically taking agricultural products and fermenting them and producing methane, biomethane. That biomethane then can be put either into generators or it could go into the gas grid to help green the gas grid. So that's what we're looking at. And the upshot to that is very much along the lines that it would be a fantastic opportunity for agriculture to have another option as opposed to being just constantly hammered by retailers in the UK, basically. I think everybody has to pay for energy. And I think that's the difference between energy and food a little bit. There's no such thing as cheap energy, is there? So why not, as an industry, are we not sort of going down that route a little bit? No one's saying you get rid of food production, but there's room for both. And we can utilise the ground we've got on the Isle of Man. We've done an awful lot of research into knowing we can do this job, and we definitely can do the job. And so it's down now to taking it really to the next stage. We can't carry on talking about it forever. We need to get on with it. As a nation, we need to get on with it.
And of course, Brian, one of the criticisms perhaps of the countryside care scheme and its replacement is it has allowed production of food on the island to fall off quite dramatically. So there is quite a lot of latent capacity across the agricultural industry which could easily pick up if there was this sort of product, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the crux of that is I sort of intimated earlier that 70% of products produced on the island are exported. And what we're looking at here is a grown on island, used on island. So you're on a level playing field with your competitors across the water, if you like. You've taken the cost of the boat out of the equation. So that puts you in a far better position to start with. And we're looking between 4 or 5 megawatt anaerobic digester, and that's somewhere between 3.5 to 5,000 acres worth of land, which sounds a lot, but we have surveyed farmers through the Manx National Farmers Union. We had responses or expressions of interest, should I say, back in from over 6,000 acres across the island, from as far south as Castletown all the way up to the Point of Ayre, predominantly northern base, but expressions of interest from all the way across. And as you said earlier, the demise of Laxey Glen Mill, there's free acreage come out of that sector, and there is plenty of land that's underfarmed, could be farmed better, could be more productive, and yeah, we've got no worries about finding the supply for an anaerobic digester.
And just for clarity, because I think you've both mentioned the demise of Laxey Glen Mills. Laxey Glen Mills is still operating, isn't it? I mean, it's still producing flour, and its flour is being used by several bakers on the island. It's not the bulk that it was when it was supplying Ramsey Bakery.
Well, I think that's the whole point, isn't it, Phil? We're back down to the butcher, the baker, it's niche. A small niche market is fine, and for a couple of farmers, that's fine. That's not a problem, and that's not decrying what they're doing at all. However, for mainstream agriculture and the bulk, there's not enough business there. Simple as. There were, I think at height, we had about 20 farmers growing milling wheat, and as tonnages dropped, everything else changed. It's down and down. I think they're down to 2 now. And it's sad.
And on a brighter note, we're currently enjoying some beautiful sunshine, and it looks like it's set for next week as well. That's good news if you have a solar array, I guess.
I think it is. I think with the solar array, it's down to light intensity as well. And the one thing the north of the island is very, very good at is its light intensity. Because what you also tend to you get the refraction off the sea, both east and west coast. So obviously up in the north here is ideal for it. But the other interesting thing within that, as technology improves, they're what's now being called agrivoltaics is where crops are actually being grown under those panels. So you're not losing agricultural land up to solar panels. You can still farm either in between the panels or even underneath those panels. And that's becoming more and more the norm. It's a new industry, and to me, that's another good reason in the Isle of Man we should be at the cutting edge of that. We should be not on the back foot, but on the front foot.
And the development that you're proposing, well, you tell us, where is it sited?
It's sited, and the actual project will be sited on the old airfield at Andreas. It's not what you would call grade 1 land or anything like that, because it's obviously been previously developed land. There's lumps of concrete here, there and everywhere. You've got 3 massive runways which are just under a mile long. Well, they're an ideal opportunity to store the product that's needed to go into an AD plant. And then obviously some of the peripheral land as well can have some solar panels on it. So you're able to give that blended price. But the thing is, because with the AD plant, there's no way we could grow enough crops, anywhere near enough crops on this farm to do that. So that's where you start having to have the knock-on effect and a real bonus to the industry. And my attitude is, at the moment, we've got an interconnector which is maybe bringing in green energy on UK farms. Well, not being funny, why aren't we using energy off Manx farms and letting Manx agriculture help to heat and light our own people?
And Brian, your task is to try and get a group of farmers to work collaboratively to supply this product. It's not always the easiest of things to get farmers to work collaboratively. So how do you go about doing that?
Okay, so the basic idea is to, dare I say, set up a farmers co-op, a supply co-op. Now, we've put expressions of interest out. We've had replies, like I said, from over 6,000 acres, about 20 farms, and ranging from 1,000 acres down to 20 acres, and north and south. And then, my role in this currently, and the vision is to have an operator for the AD plant and a group of farmers supplying. My role will be making sure the operators have the variety of products, quantity of products and quality of products that they require to get the best fermentation out of the anaerobic digester, the most efficient, and then liaising with the farmers to produce and supply that, and of course a workable price for everybody through the middle. So that's my role in that. To take things a step further, towards the end of April, with a group, SAOS, which is an offshoot of Scottish Agricultural Colleges, and they specialise in setting up farmers' co-ops. So we are taking a group of 11 farmers away to look at 2 anaerobic digesters in Scotland, and having some discussions and meetings and presentations during that trip on setting up a co-op and managing an AD plant. So out of all that, hopefully, we'll form the framework of the co-op and start to put a board in place to run that co-op.
And you mentioned there a range of products. What sort of things are farmers going to need to grow to supply this?
Yeah, 4 main products. The one area where we have the advantage over Scotland and should be more efficient is in double cropping. So we'll be able to put a crop of rye in the winter, harvest that towards the end of April, and then put a crop of maize in and harvest that in the autumn and back to rye again. So there's 2 products there in rye and maize. Grass silage will be another one, and the 4th one would be fodder beet. And it's not just a matter of growing some of all. The anaerobic digester will work on having a mix of 40% of these. So it's having the quantities to make that mix right and the quality.
And I guess harvest time, you'd have a bountiful supply of these things. How does it work, though, I don't know, over the winter months when obviously things aren't going to be growing and there won't be so much to harvest?
Yeah, it will be a harvest period for the various different crops, and then storage on site. So once they're harvested and into storage, that's the end of the agricultural piece, if you like, and they become then the property of the operator of the AD plant for those to pick and mix and blend and do. So it would, all this land we're talking about is probably getting farmed in one way or another at the moment, but it'll be just, harvest periods and all going to one point.
And presumably the storage, does that need specialist storage? Does it need to be sort of cool places or?
No, it's just agricultural products. If you think of an anaerobic digester, in basic terms, is the same as a cow's stomach. Some people will have you believe you shouldn't eat meat and dairy because of the methane produced from cows. So we're taking that principle and with science, etc., taking it to the nth degree to produce as much methane as we possibly can instead of the least, and then harvesting that methane for power. So it is basically a cow's stomach, so everything is up to the point of going in the anaerobic digester just to an agricultural standard, no more.
I know in some parts of the world, waste food products can be put into anaerobic digesters. Is that something that could happen in the one that's being proposed?
It's not proposed at the moment because there's various different levels and licenses required. If you're doing agricultural products, that's the basic license. Once you start adding food waste, that becomes another level. And once you start putting human slurry, sewerage, etc. in, which some plants do, that becomes another license level again. And out of the beauty of the anaerobic digester after the first years, it becomes fairly circular in that if you put 10 tonnes of product in, you will get 9 tonnes of what's called digestate out. So that's the product with the methane taken out. But you still got the potash, the phosphates, the nitrogen in there. And then that can be put back on the land to grow the next crop. So you are then in a position of not importing organic fertilisers, etc. So it becomes self-fulfilling in a way.
I think, in all fairness, Phil, you were asking, can you put different wastes in? I think that's where the problems start coming, and that's, again, I live here, it's my environment. That's when you get into hearing about digesters with smells and stuff like that. You know, I've been away and seen 1 or 2 digesters and spoken to people operating them, and they come into 2 categories, as you've alluded to. There's ones that run off agricultural products, and then there's others that work off waste products from, say, the food industry, etc. And the ones that tend to run with the waste products, they're the ones that give off the odours. Because it's not the only thing, as Brian's alluded to, the thing that would normally smell off an agricultural product is the gas, the methane. But that's just the thing you want. So you don't want those smells. So with agricultural products, it is just anything you'd smell in the countryside as normal. You know, there's nothing horrible about it at all, and I think that's the interesting bit. And to be honest with you, there's members of our local authority actually coming on this trip as well, for that reason, that we did have a public meeting. It's going back probably 12-18 months ago now, and what the major concern that was expressed out there was smell. You know, and it's a sewage farm. It couldn't be any more different than that. And the last thing anybody wants is smell. They don't. And if they run properly, they definitely shouldn't smell. And as Brian's alluded to, you've got to be you're after getting the maximum amount of methane you can out to make it as efficient as possible. And so you can't afford, it's not a cowboy operation. It's got to be done by a professional company. You don't think, you're not talking to the 2 guys here that would run an AD plant. This will be done by a professional firm. And it's not new cutting edge technology. These AD plants, I think there's over 600 in the UK, and there's certainly a lot in Europe as well. But the beauty with them is, you are producing what they call baseload power, so it's not intermittent power. So it's there all the time, and the only problem with that, as I said to you before, is it's on cost. Well, if we bring it through this energy hub, so we have a blended price. Obviously, intermittent renewables, the likes of solar, is fairly cheap to produce. So, but if you blend that with the more expensive from an AD plant, you get a cheaper blended price. And at the end of the day, it's got to be about sustainability, it's got to be about independence, but it's also got to be sensible for the consumer in paying for electricity. And we all know where we are at the moment with that. We've probably got the most expensive electricity in the British Isles. And that's at no fault whatsoever to the likes of Manx Utilities. They are governed by the energy market and what's happening there. Well, if we can slightly usurp that and produce that on island, everyone's a winner. Or I would suggest everyone's a winner. And you've also got the other thing that the digester itself would probably employ 20 people. So you're then getting that multiplier effect into the economy. And it's just looking after ourselves, really.
So you mentioned there that you need people who know what they're talking about to run these plants, and you have got a partner working on this scheme who has expertise.
I've got a partner that works very much with renewable energy. He does an awful lot of work he's doing an awful lot of work at the moment in the Channel Islands on their solar projects. In fact, he's actually a consultant with Jersey Electric, so he knows it. But he's also got, as I mentioned earlier, this agrivoltaics, and he's finding there's more to it than just putting a load of solar panels in. It's what you do underneath those panels, and it's quite interesting. He's actually got a project moving forward in Jersey on the Crown Estate. So actually the King is really keen on this type of technology. So it's a really exciting thing to be involved in, Phil. And so if on the one hand we've got the potential technology of new farming practices under the likes of panels, but also, and to me more importantly, we're bringing something with the ADI plant to help mainstream agriculture and those young people that are really, I've got a son and his mate, they're all the same. They're really getting to the wit's end of what they can do, what they can't do. And it gives the other options then. As soon as you get into this sort of scenario, it improves agricultural contracting, which obviously means there's more money in the economy. So to me, it's a win-win. And at the same time, if we've got, on the back of that, independence of supply, sensible economic costs for power as well, everyone's a winner, because at the end of the day, MU are still going to have to distribute that power. No one's on about distributing the power. It's very much down to them, but it's giving them an option to have sensible baseload power generated on the Isle of Man, which is not at the vagaries of the energy markets.
And we're not talking here about enough energy to power the parish of Andreas or something like that. We're talking quite a substantial amount, aren't we?
We are. We this project would probably power 25% of the island's needs, or potentially can do that. So, I think that's the interesting thing with energy anyway. I think where we're going to be going forward is a mix of different technologies anyway. And I think, other people will have a part to play. Certainly MU will have a massive part to play in that. So to me, it's all working together in a collaborative manner. And if we can get to that stage, and hence the reason, if we can get our farm, because obviously the farmers are really keen. And at the end of the day, they will own the co-op. It'll be their business. It's nothing to do with me. But and hence where Brian's organised this and not myself. But if we can possibly end up with a really buoyant industry on the back of that, everyone benefits, including the public.
And you mentioned the MUA there and how big a task they have. Of course, one of the difficulties they have is balancing all the various options that they may have for electricity production. So if there are other renewable energy projects such as the one that they're proposing at Airy Staine, or perhaps they want to take energy from the Orsted development if that goes ahead, or and then of course when the wind doesn't blow they'll need to have baseload electricity from somewhere too. That's quite a difficult job to get that balanced, and that's the MUA's role, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I don't envy them that role, because we can all sit as smart asses on the side and criticise, but they do have a unique. And in all fairness to the MU, we have had really consistent power. Unfortunately, they've been to start with lumbered with a green policy that we are going to go totally green and that's it. And by the way, you've got to get on and do that. But I think the double whammy is all of a sudden, since the idea of the greening, we've gone into this energy crisis, and that ain't going to go away. It's here for the long term. If anyone can predict to me how long that conflict in Ukraine is going to last, I don't know, but it won't be the last.
It's certainly not been solved in a day, as Donald Trump suggested. The encouraging news for the MUA from your project, of course, is that the AD plant produces what is described as baseload, i.e. if it's windy or if it's not windy, if it's sunny or not sunny, that plant will continue to produce, assuming, of course, that the crops have managed to grow during the year.
Oh, it will, and also bear in mind, as loads alter, those generators don't have to be running flat out all the time. The AD plant will, because it's producing gas, but then obviously that gas can be stored and then used as and when it's necessary. And as I've said, there is the opportunity as well, potentially, to put some of that gas into the gas grid as well.
And in terms of storage, that is the storage going to be on site?
Yeah. Oh, everything will be on site. That's the beauty of the site. It's big enough to be able to not only store the gas, but also most of the products that go into that AD plant. And the site itself sits in a little bit of a bowl, so it's not readily seen. You've seen it yourself, Phil. Unless you actually dropped on it, you wouldn't even know it was there, to be honest. And I think the one thing I'm also quite keen on saying is this isn't on sort of virgin agricultural ground. This has had a previous life as an airfield, and to be honest with you, it needs to be doing something else to help the nation, if that makes sense.
So you're not about to embark, but in a few weeks' time you're embarking on this trip to Scotland. What are the next steps, assuming that the trip doesn't result in everyone saying, oh, actually, I'm not so sure that's not a good idea. And I guess you wouldn't have planned the trip if that was the likely outcome. What happens next?
The next thing really is sitting down and actually agreeing either an agreement on price of electricity supply. So we'd end up with an intention to come up with the likes of a power purchase agreement we could do with Manx Utilities. At the end of the day, the price itself is going to be based on, they ain't going to pay any more for power than they can buy in the UK. So at the end of the day, you're constrained a little bit. So there should be no fear from the consumer that they've got to buy this very, very expensive power. But what it does do, it gives them the resilience that, as you've alluded to, if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, we can be still producing Manx-produced energy. And
you have done the calculations. I guess you've done the calculations. You are convinced that you can produce this at a price that's affordable for the MUA?
100%. But that, again, is down to the hub bit of it. The fact we can blend the different technologies brings that blended cost down. Yeah, at the end of the day, unless the MUA can buy power off us at an affordable level, they ain't going to buy it, are they? So the onus is very much on us as well, Phil.
And Brian, from the agriculture perspective, if this goes ahead, it's a positive boost?
Yes, in many different ways. One is produced and used on island, so there's a direct link there. And secondly, once and if this project goes ahead, the investment in the AD plant is going to be over a 25, 40-year period. So that will be operating. So anybody young coming into agriculture, there's opportunities there to invest in contracting machinery, etc., knowing that the work's going to be there going forward. And so, yeah, many advantages for the agricultural side.
And a final word then to you, Robert. If we're sitting here in a year's time, 2 years' time, 10 years' time, when are we likely to see this all happen, assuming everything goes to plan?
Well, if everything goes to plan and we get positive feedback in terms of what we're going in trips and we can start talking through with government to get something off the ground. The actual building of an AD plant was probably a 6-month project. It's not massive. And the same with solar panels. It's quite easy to do. We've obviously got the same vagaries of our planning as everything else. You know, it takes as long as it takes. But I just think it's such a sensible... The amount of people have said to me, well, Robert, why hasn't it happened? This is a no-brainer. And I think it is a no-brainer. But let's get some facts in front of people. And the one thing, by all means, Phil, after this has taken place, we can sit down and have another chat. That's not a problem.
That was Robert Morrie and Brian Brumby. So what do you think? A great opportunity for our energy security and pumping some much needed money into struggling farm businesses? Or is it just talk and it'll never see the light of day? Robert and Brian certainly seem keen to make it happen. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gaughan. Gura Maius and Geisachrum. Thanks for listening.